Okay, we ready to start?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, welcome everybody to the 2024 Hyperspace Challenge webinar series. This is part of an ongoing series hosted by the Hyperspace Challenge Air Force Research Lab and the U.S. Space Force to strengthen the connective tissue between diverse communities within the space industry. I'm Kelly Stafford. I'm the interim program director for Hyperspace Challenge. And I'm also joined with my co-host, and that's Roxanne. She is the former Hyperspace PM, who has since gone on to work with BMNT and now is on her own as a consultant. It's really great to have you back, Roxanne, helping with Hyperspace again. So as we go through this discussion, if you all would please put your questions in the Q&A, that's down there at the bottom. If you go to the bottom of your screen, you should see the little icon that says Q&A. That's where we would like you to put your questions. If you put them in the chat, we'll probably tell you to put them back over in the Q&A just because it's easier and it keeps it all corralled in one spot and everybody can make sure that we answer those questions for you. Today, we are hoping to shed some light on the mystery that is government budgets. I am really excited for this one because I feel like I have a lot to learn on this as well. We've invited a few gentlemen here that can offer some practical knowledge and advice that could just give you that strategic advantage that you need down the road. So thank you, everybody. I'm really excited for this one. And I'm really excited to have such a great expert panel to, discuss this and give us their insight. So with that, I'm going to move it on over to the good stuff. And Roxanne, take it away.
Awesome. Thanks, Kelly. It's great to be back here today, hanging out with the Hyperspace Challenge crew. As Kelly kind of alluded to, the past several years, I've been working at the intersection of small business, the federal government, and venture capital. And so kind of right here in this sweet spot of how do folks break into working with the federal government, but also on the other side, how can the federal government better support the small business community? And so I'm really excited to have this conversation because this is something that often pops up. And oftentimes folks in the rooms may or may not actually know what they're talking about when they're talking about securing leftover government funding. So the good news is we have two folks who actually can speak to this quite well. I'm really excited to learn from them. As Kelly mentioned, please add your Q&As. We'll make this as interactive as possible, but we'll have some dedicated time for questions at the end. Please don't be afraid to chime in. Anything about your experiences, get to know one another on the chat. You're more than welcome to hop in and let us know where you want this conversation to go, because we can adjust this. If you let us know we're starting too basic, we'll get more specific. If you want us to move in different directions, we can do that. So we are nimble and we are here for you. So with that said, I want to hop right into the content. I'm going to kick it over to Spencer first to introduce himself. He's coming to us from Long Capture Consulting, a long-term friend of the Hyperspace Challenge. So Spencer, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself and just giving us a little context about what makes you able to talk about some of these government funding do's and don'ts.
Yeah, thanks, Roxanne. So as she mentioned, Spencer Armstrong, I'm currently the capture manager over at Long Capture. My background initially was Air Force contracting, where I served both at the operational level and at the program level. Now in my role at Long Capture was really stood up to help small businesses navigate the federal acquisition space. And so right now I manage a team of our capture team, and we, on behalf of our clients, we are tasked with developing an acquisition strategy, and then it's simply executing on that strategy. And we do things a little differently than your traditional industry, or excuse me, your traditional DoD contractor, where we look for non-traditional opportunities. And that really starts with an entry point, whether that's leveraging a SBIR win so you can have a follow-on opportunity or sole source authority, or even securing efforts through some of the set-asides. We leverage that, and that's kind of our endpoint We try to avoid the competitive landscape. I know this is probably not the best thing to say to the government folks, but from the industry side, we think it's more best suited for our clients, especially our small business partners, to come at it from a non-competitive way. So what we do is we try to set up interest, and then using our kind of knowledge and expertise, find the right acquisition path, hopefully non-competitive, as I mentioned, and then doing business that way. So I'm excited to jump on this call and look forward to your questions.
Amazing. Thanks for joining us today, Spencer. And with that, I will kick it over to Mike Roberts, joining us from Galapagos Consulting.
Hi, everybody. So Mike Roberts, the reason I'm able to talk to you today has nothing to do with working for Galapagos, which is a small business. It really goes from my background, where I had 27 years in the government, in different aspects. But really the one that applies to this is I was a little bit more than 10 years as a PEO, both on the Navy side and on the Department of the Air Force / Space Force when it stood up. I was the director and PEO for Space Rapid Capabilities Office, which we stood up in 2019, and also Project Overmatch for the Navy, which was a little bit later than that. So, I have quite a bit of experience navigating the budget process, taking advantage of leftover funds and how to get access to those, and also more importantly, which is what I'll talk about a lot here today, is the timelines at which you can influence that, number one. And then the second one is the timelines on which you can take advantage of it, meaning there's leftover funds, or there's ways to get to funding, or contracting mechanisms to get to funding that you may not be aware of, or know how to contact, get in contact with people that do. So I'll talk a little bit about that today as we go through this, but that's kind of my background and why I'm able to talk to you today. But really happy to be here, happy to help. I myself, and not talking for Spencer, but I myself really love questions and answers. I don't like to talk forever, because you can look up half of what I'm going to say on the internet. So I don't want to belabor that. It's more about the interaction here for me than anything. So I'm happy to answer any questions. Please put those in the dialogue box, and we'll get to them if we can. I think they're also going to post our contact information. Feel free to reach out to me afterwards if you want to talk one-on-one about anything. And I'm again just happy to help you any way I can. Thanks.
All right, so Mike, you shouldn't have even muted. I'm going to kick it right back to you to start. Since you mentioned your extensive work in the PEOs, that is often a place that companies are told they need to be talking to. From your perspective, having sat there, talk to me about the budgeting process from your side, and perhaps where small businesses start to interface in that process. Give us kind of the lay of the land.
Yeah. So I'll say this, right? You'll hear a lot of comments about, hey, you need to inject yourself into PEO, or you need to get in front of the PEO. What I would say to you is that's kind of a misnomer a little bit, right? So when I sat in as a PEO, I had no less than probably 100 meetings a week. And that's probably no exaggeration, right? It sometimes was more than that. And not to say I was too busy to meet with small businesses, but I wasn't able to provide them the attention and the detail they needed to help them along the way, right? So when I say things like, hey, you do need to meet with the PEO here, I don't mean the PEO themselves. I mean the PEO and their representatives, right? So each of them will have, this is talking Department of the Air Force, so I'll just, kind of leave it at that, Air Force and Space Force. On the Navy side, it's a little different, but for the Department of the Air Force, right, or the Space Force specifically, they have SMLs, senior material leaders, they have material leaders underneath that. Those are the people you really need to meet with, right? And I'll talk about the timeline of that in just a second. But so you don't necessarily need to get in front of the PEO, because that's not where your bang for the buck is, right? At the material leader level or SML level, they understand the details of the technical aspects of what's going on, and they manage the budget for the PEO. They really do. They manage their portions of the budget, right? So if an SML or ML came to me and go, there's this small business that we can get credit for because we have small business goals and we have the budget to do it, and they fit this niche and they can take this on for the risk, within the risk profile we have, there was no questions, right? I didn't even need to meet with the small business. I was going to go do what they asked me to do, right? Because it kind of fit into my strategy as a PEO. So remember that as you move forward, right? Don't always just try to get in front of the PEO, although that's important sometimes too. It's really about their staff and the people that they have under them actually doing the real legwork. So that's number one. Secondly, from a timeline perspective, right? The budget happens, and again, I'm not going to go through all the dates, but the budget is a secular thing, right? It happens the same time every year. Please don't take that to mean they're all the same, because they're not, right? There are deadlines from a budget perspective, right? And speaking from a PEO, from the PEO side, we were very driven by that schedule, meaning that, we knew the budget, our submission to OMB was December from a service perspective, right? So you had to back that up. To make sure that, hey, you hit the DMAG in the September, October timeframe. That's where all the combatant commands and services come together to match up their requirements with budget. And then before that, right, you had to go into your specific service process, budgeting process, which is, for Space Force S5, S8 ran. And that's where you kind of match up your allocated budget with everything that's going on for the future, whether it be extensions or whatever. And then, it kind of backed up from there. That's the 2-year out cycle, right? And then at the same time, you were dealing with the next year's budget, right? Because we know the next year's fiscal budget starts on October 1st. So you had to then back that piece up. So they have a lot of overlapping things. And again, you can find all those dates, the projected dates online. That's easy to do. But more specifically, what I would mention to you today is for leftover funding. We call it, some people call it the UFR process. We call it sweep up. You may hear that term as well. That's a big place where you as a small business can get cash quickly. Here's why, right? So for 2-year money, which is RDT&E as we call it, right? That's really that, and O&M money, which is operational money. That's 1-year money. Those have to be spent before you move into the fiscal year. And I mean, put on contract, not necessarily spent, but put on contract, or we lose it as a PEO. I lose that money. I cannot use it. I turn it back over to the Treasury, and it is what it is, right? So every service goes through a cycle of sweep up towards the end of the year. It usually starts in around the August timeframe. So if you have done your homework and met with the SMLs and MLs, shown them the need, what you can fulfill, that sweep up cash is easy access to you, right? And you should even ask the PEOs when you meet with them, hey, happy to take up sweep up money, happy to take you for dollars, whatever they want to call it. And we're ready to do that, right? So that means you have to be ready to accept that money, get it on contract quickly, and go start the work, right? And that's what they're looking for, to help them buy down that risk. Because they do, whether it's right or wrong, they do get graded on, how much money they give back and spend and that kind of stuff, right? Right, wrong, or indifferent. That's the way it works. Because if I don't spend, let's say I don't spend $10 million in this fiscal year, usually what happens is the service will dock me $10 million next year because they know I'm that far behind. So that's the last thing I want as a PEO, because then my schedule slide and everything, delivery slides, and I get graded on that as well. So if you're ready to accept that money, that is just a huge, that's a huge bonus, and an easy button for, PEOs, right? It's easy to give it to a large business, but you don't see as much impact, and you can't say things like, hey, I have met my small business goals and I even exceeded it by doing that. And it's just an easy button for us to get there. So ask them about that, but to get there, you need to meet with them well ahead of that time frame, right? And then at the same time, be working with them on, okay, here's my long-term budget needs and how I can take different cash, and then how that impacts them, right? So if they give you sweep up money this year, you may be like, hey, I don't need $10 million next year. You can buy that back to the PEO. That's a big deal, right? That's a huge deal to them. So hopefully that answered your question. That was a very long, drawn out way of saying it, but it is a couple of opportunities for you to get in there.
That's a great lay of the land for us, kind of understanding both where you're coming from on the government side. And then Spencer, I want to talk to you a little bit about how you're helping companies position, given what Mike just talked about here. So he's given us some of those timelines, some of the emphasis or the goals of the PEO. What do you advise when companies, when companies start to think about whether this is a good fit for them?
Yeah, to Mike's point, certainly it's something we always ask. You mentioned fallout funding, you for whatever, whoever you're talking to, whatever they call it. I would certainly bring it up. For us, we try to get ahead of the process because we know one of the things he didn't mention, I think, which is very cognizant to our clients, is the contracting process, right? So to get that commitment, obviously the financial commitment is huge, but oftentimes you'll see some of these contracting shops shut down requirements later in the fiscal year, right? If they're going to have to execute $1 million, $5 million, $10 million award, they're going to want ample amount of time before that money expires, right? So we're working backwards from that October 30th date, from that September 30th date backwards to make sure that our clients are best positioned. So in talking to them, you're going to want to know specifically, what the landscape is of the fallout funding, how they traditionally do it, and then what the deadline is to their local contracting shop and how fast they need that requirement turned over. The other thing that we mentioned to clients is having a vehicle set up. Mike mentioned that it's a lot easier to give these large primes the money because they usually have simply an easy button, a large IDIQ. They already have a contract in place where they can add additional $5, $10 million very easily, right? For some of these small businesses where we're trying to get your foot in the door, maybe you have a phase 1, phase 2 SBIR, you don't always have the luxury of having that contract vehicle. So working out ahead of time, if you were able to secure any sort of money throughout the fiscal year and get that on contract to say you get 500K and then using that 500K to leverage a higher ceiling IDIQ where now you have a little wiggle room, you have room to place that fallout funding on a contract. That's huge because now you are simply like a large prime and you are an easy button. They can simply add that money to that contract. So those are some of the things you're going to want to ask first and foremost, like their current tempo and how they do fallout funding. 2, you're going to want to work on a contract vehicle as well, and then understanding the contracting aspect as well. There's stuff that we can talk about later here that the government obviously owns that contracting process, but if you can interject a little bit and help them with some of those documents or that requirements package that the contracting team needs to execute the award, certainly helps speed things up a little bit as well.
Yeah, so making someone like Mike and his team's life a little easier along the way never hurts. I want to get into some of those hard details in a second around setting up, your contract vehicle, but I want to really quick hit on some of the soft skills around how do you actually bring this up in a conversation? When might it be appropriate? And I want to hear from both of you. Spencer first. And if you have any, anonymous anecdotes about times it's kind of went well or when it feels like it's right to bring something like this up, and maybe sometimes when it's doesn't feel right to bring some of this stuff up. So Spencer, any comments on that?
Yeah, so there's really never a good time, right? I mean, a lot of the frustration with our clients is they're always met with, sorry, we just don't have any money, right? And so what we do is we build what we call our unfunded request package, right? And that's usually done, that's usually a government function. And it might have seen this differently, but especially at the operational level where they rack and stack things internal, like say at the squadron or the group or wing level, they have that package. And what we do is we present that, maybe we have an intro or demo call, they go over the technology, and then we're met at the back end. What are the various, if they're interested, what are the various acquisition pathways can we pursue? Is it SBIR? Do they have the money to execute a contract now? If they don't, then we kind of start pushing that U4 element. Well, can we provide you with a package so you at least have it internally to shop around your leadership? And as the time comes, as the money drops, hopefully it's rack and stack and it's enough of a priority internal to you guys where you guys can pull the essentially select that requirement and have it funded. So I don't think there's ever a bad time. It's part of kind of the stepping stone of what we ask for in intro and demo calls, especially when you're met like, we don't have any money right now. That's okay. We understand that potentially you guys might see some fallout funding later in the year. Can we provide you with some sort of package that you can shop around to leadership so at least there's visibility on it, right? And I think even if it's not selected, at least you're getting eyes on what you're doing. And the way we write the package is honestly more like a compelling SBIR type of proposal because you're telling them how much money they could save, how many lives they can save, et cetera, right? So those are some of the things you're going to want to provide the user benefit or what would be lost if that requirement was not funded.
Awesome. Thank you, Spencer. Mike, any other response to that in terms of being on the receiving end of some of this for lack of a better word, it gets a little salesy sometimes. So, how does it feel on the other side?
Yeah, so Spencer's right on, right? So the thing you have to come in with is this, right? How are you making the PEO's life easier? That's as simple as that, right? And I mean that in the context of I have a SBIR phase 2 or 3, right? That's an easy button to put money on. It really is, or I have a contracting vehicle already in place to put money on. And more importantly, what they're going to want to hear from you is, here's the requirement I am solving for you. Here's the low risk approach I'm bringing to you, whether in low risk may be the right wrong, but risk aspect of the thing I'm bringing to you. Just be open and honest with them and be like, hey, this buys down this risk. It fulfills this requirement. And not only that, but we're ready to kind of take on funding. I think that's spot on, right? If you hit them with that first and then say, oh, by the way, I can accept fallout cash, whatever you want to call it, right? That's the approach you want to take versus, do you have a bunch of money? First, that's not the discussion you want to have, right? It's just not how it resonates with them. And I think you'll get a lot farther that way. Come in with your technical benefits of what you're bringing on first.
Great, thank you very much. I want to hit a couple of the questions that are just a little bit clarifying on some of the comments that you've made so far today. So one of them, I think, Mike, this is in reference to some of your comments around small business goals. Do hub zone certifications get any kind of preference? No, there's no real distinction. And would a small business enterprise certification help in any regard? I'm not familiar with the small business enterprise certification.
I don't know about that one either, but I will say that as far as hub zone is concerned, no, we don't. There's no preferential aspect to hub zone. It's just another mechanism that gets you, on more lists that the PEOs might see. That's what I would say to that.
So it sounds like perhaps at a higher level, you were just looking at meeting your small business numbers.
Yep.
Is that something you can share? Kind of what percentages, or does that vary PEO to PEO?
Yeah, it varies completely by PEO, right? So some of them are really high. And I'll say high, it may not seem high to this group, but some of them are in the 30%, right? Which when you're talking about multi-billion dollars is a lot, right? And and so, I always set mine at a kind of a modest 15%. And it was always accepted by the SAE, but I did that because my portfolio was more highly classified. It's harder to break into classified things. And we delivered systems of systems. And that's very difficult for a small business to kind of get them, break into that market. And we were trying to, 15% was actually a stretch goal, right? When you're doing things big like that. But there's some in the, Space Force side that all they do is software. So their numbers are probably well above 30%, right? And so it really depends on PEO by PEO.
And is that something that's publicly available? Is there any way to gauge what a PEO's targets are in that regard?
That's a great
other than
question.
kind of what you just mentioned, using, common sense, but
I don't know. That's a great one. I could get back to the team on whether they're publicly available. I know I owed it as a PEO to the SAE, the Service Acquisition Executive. That's tracked internal to the service, and then they do have to report it to the SBA. But I don't know if they report a cumulative number or each PEO by PEO. So I could get back, and Spencer might know the answer to that too.
Yeah, what I'll say is, you mentioned SBA. Each kind of office has their own SBA rep. Part of the contracting process is, back in the day, I don't know why I still remember this, is about 10, 15 years ago, was a 2579. Before you did any sort of solicitation, you'd have to make sure you pretty much get a check marked by the Small Business Administration, because they're tracking these goals and they're tracking the percentages of awards for each small business. So if you got in touch with their local small business rep, they'd have those, depending on which organization or PEO they're talking to, they'd have those numbers for sure.
Yeah, the other thing I would mention is, Spencer hit on it, right, is every time I would go to have a new contract, right, they would push me to have a small business set aside on that contract, right? And so I would have to report whether I could do that or not. And then they do track that, right? They literally track contract by contract, whether you're meeting that set aside or not. So he's right. They probably do have it at that level, but I just don't know if it's publicly available or not to everybody.
all right, thank you. And I think this is one more question that just comes to trying to find some clarity in the government madness, I suppose. This one says, does opportunities listed in DSIP, DSIP identify specific PEO needs? So I think that's just another trying to read through the tea leaves. Spencer, this might be a question for you in terms of like navigating posted like RFP. Does that, how do you know what aligns with what PEO or things like that?
Yeah, so as far as DSIP goes, those are usually in reference to SBIR topics. Generally, there are some open topics which, you can essentially pitch anything under the sun, but those specific topics, you'll have a TPOC identified, right? And so they might not be necessarily PEO. From the Air Force perspective, you see a lot of money spent requirements driven through AFRL, so some of these research labs. But what it'll do is it'll give you somebody that is definitely interested. So the requirement is real and they're looking to utilize some SBIR funding up front to potentially fund it down the road. So there are some sort of requirements being driven from their leadership that would indicate that this would be a possibility to fund down the line. And in the interim, it'd be funded via SBIR though.
Great, thank you. All right, so I think these next few questions kind of meld into the direction we want to head. I know we started to get into this a little bit with some of your comments, Spencer, but I want to spend some more time here because I think this really is important and can get really technical. So maybe we slow down, make sure we're explaining some of our acronyms in this segment. But, Mike, you said ready to accept money. Can you talk us through that in a little bit more detail? And then I think, Spencer, you can fill in some gaps too.
Well, I think Spencer hit it right, is you have to have a mechanism for me to put it on contract to you, right? And that can be a SBIR phase 2 or 3. It could be a direct contract. It could be an IDIQ, you being on an IDIQ. There are a lot of mechanisms for you to be able to accept it. But from a technical sense, right, what I was referring to is if you have 2 employees in your company and you come to me and go, hey, I'm going to sweep up, $2 or $3 million. That's just not logical, right? In my mind, I can't wrap my head around how you were going to actually spend that money and actually deliver something, right? So you have to be ready from a cash perspective, but also say, hey, I'm ready. I can ramp up quickly. I can get the people we need. It's fine. Or we have them work in another program, whatever that might be, right? And not only accept it, but also be able to execute it. That's where I was coming from.
Perfect. That makes a lot of sense. And Spencer, in that regard, especially too, when you talk about, I know you've already touched on this, but there's a lot in there. So talk to us a little bit more about how you get ready.
Yeah, so unfortunately, when these funds become available, you're really obviously bumping up against the end of the fiscal year, whether, to Mike's point, it's RDT&E 2-year, procurement funds, 3-year money, or O&M money, which is, the annual money. And so when you get to that point where money is available late springtime, you only have 2-3 months at most to get that money on contract. Now, part of the contracting aspect of it is there's a long timeline. If I were to start from scratch for a new acquisition, you're talking potentially a 6 to 9 month process. There's some variables in there, but that would put you well past the fiscal year, and then they would lose out on the money. So to Mike's point, they're more willing to give that money to somebody that has an easy button, a contract, a vehicle in place. There are some questions in the chat like, how can I get a contract vehicle like that? It is hard to get as a small business, a C task order meaning a little bit of money to create a higher ceiling IDIQ. IDIQ is our favorite approach, but to Mike's point, you can do a purchase order with not to exceed amount, with option cleanse or whatever it may be, where you can catch that money as well. There are some other ways to do it as well. ABMS had a MAC contract, so some of these MACs you can start shopping around, where it's the requirements that are driven out of there are very vague. And so you can implement different requirements from the various PEOs pointing to that. They can MIPR or transfer the money internal to these large MACs and get that executed on contract. So there's various ways to skin the cat from seeking a contract. But without that, if you are going to try to take on any sort of substantial money at the end of the fiscal year, you've got to have some way to get it on. The other approach too, when you're dealing with PEOs, obviously they work hand in hand with large prime. So if there's a program that's being run by a large prime, maybe you can approach them and say, hey, this PEO wants me to have their service. Can we work out a deal where I'm on your contract as a sub? Obviously, they're going to probably take a percentage, but that would be another potential pathway as well.
A quick clarifying question on that. Does GSA MAS contract work? You're familiar with that one, Spencer?
Yeah, GSA. So the schedules obviously can be done as well. The ANS contracts, which is kind of their innovation phase 3 type of work that they do a lot. That's where we direct our clients to, because the good thing about GSA is it's decentralized, meaning they can accept money from a variety of services and agencies, right? So not only are you just working with one PEO, but if I had success with one PEO, now I can market that contract to other people and take incoming money from them and cut separate task orders and separate statement of works for that requirement across the landscape of the DoD.
All right, and we'll do one more dive in before we kind of come back up and shift directions a little bit. How do you avoid CAS flow downs when, for example, subbing to a prime for sweep up funds? Oh, and is that, I think that'd be
Did you
for
say
you.
CAS?
Or CAS flow downs.
I'm not sure what exactly. Can you clarify? Is that cost accounting standards you're asking about, and having to be lumped in with the large primes there? You probably can't avoid that, to be honest. So the primes are going to have certain requirements that are mandated by their contract. If that is then passed off to the subs, and then you are required to have cost accounting standards, which for a small business is going to cost you a lot to get your books in order. This is so the DCAAs, the Defense Contract Audit Agencies of the world, can have access to your books and to make sure that the money that is being routed to you is being spent on the things you're saying. And so there's probably not a way to avoid that. I don't know if that's what you're talking about. Hopefully I'm not just rambling for nothing, but I think that's what you're talking about. But yeah, I don't think there's a way to avoid that when you're talking to a large prime. Now, if you're dealing directly with the PEO office, you can do it so it's maybe a firm fixed price contract where you don't have to necessarily worry about CAS earlier on until you get to the big dollar stuff.
Mike, did you want to chime in on something before I shift gears for a minute?
Nope, I'm just listening and learning. I'm good.
All right,
I was gonna say something, but I pushed the wrong button, so we're good.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll keep working down the question list as we go through, but I wanted to shift for a minute to a question that we got earlier about building the relationships with PEOs. So we've talked a lot about the mechanisms, kind of making the contractor, the acquisition process smoother for the acquisitions team. We have a few more questions coming up about that, but you got to get your foot in the door first. It sounds like, and we've touched on this a little bit earlier too, about the when to mention this, when to mention looking for sweep ups or anything like that. But how do you even start building these relationships? Is it once you have an SBIR? Is it, how are you getting your foot in the door? What are you seeing that's effective? And so Mike, as someone who's received the hundreds of meetings per week, what are people doing that are effective strategies when talking to the PEO offices? Or
Yeah,
sorry,
so-
PEO.
Yeah, a couple things is, I've rarely met with small businesses in my office, right? I would always be execution when I was in my office, right? So I would meet with the primes, things like that, right? But new small businesses, when I went to conferences or shows like that, that's when I met with them, right? That's your goal. That should be your goal. Meet them at the conferences, events like that, because that's when they have dedicated time to sit down with small businesses specifically to have those break-in conversations, right? And again, it doesn't, when I say PEO, I don't mean the PEO, as could be, but there are SMLs and MLs that I typed in earlier. Those give you the inroads as well, right? So meet with them anytime. You don't need a SBIR already existing. You don't need a StratFi, TACFi, whatever it may be. You just need to kind of find that mechanism to meet with them. But be ready to talk about what you can bring, right? Don't go in there and just say, hey, I'm here to just listen to you as a PEO representative and understand what you need. They get that all day, right? You should be there to give them an answer as to how, what you're bringing and have done your homework to say, I think this fits in your, portfolio. And sometimes it doesn't, and that's okay. And they'll point you in the right direction, but be ready to have that conversation.
The conference circuit, yeah, you got to do it. But it's good to know that that's actually effective, So, Spencer, over to you when you're engaging with companies and they're trying to get those first conversations, build relationships. What are some of the strategies you all coach?
Yeah, so to Mike's point, they are heavily saturated with outreach from small businesses. So one is you got to differentiate yourself. Like what sets you apart? The military is, whether it's OPRs, EPRs, it's very numbers based. So how much money are you saving? How many lives can you potentially save? How much more efficient can you be utilizing your technology with their requirements? So come to them with these stats, right? And also identifying capability gaps that you have read maybe in public or have been spoken to at conference, and how your requirements specifically can address those and fulfill those capability gaps, right? Mike mentioned shows and events, like there's Soft Week coming up, which is a perfect opportunity. All the PEOs, program offices, allow you to sign up for one-on-ones with those, and that's your chance to sit down with them in person and pitch, right? An in-person pitch is the gold standard. You can get in front of them, and that is an opportunity for some technical back and forth. Oftentimes, you even potentially get the PEO, not all the time, but you'll get the PEO on those, which is very helpful. But it's all to that point, it's all differentiating. And then when we're talking specifically about unfunded requests, now it's how easy can you make the acquisition process? So I know we've talked a lot about that, but those are some of the tips I would give.
And then since thank you so much, and yeah, I obviously do your homework. I guess it's the treat humans like humans. Don't make meetings for the sake of meetings. Have a point, but also be curious. Don't pitch too hard. Those are always some of the things that fine balance seems to be the golden ticket oftentimes of coming in with curiosity and partnership. You can't just pitch the government a commercial solution and expect it to not face any difficulties, but at the same time you need to understand your customer like you would in any other business relationship. So I think that all resonates, even though sometimes I think we all sometimes get a little heads down and start pitching and forget about some of those basics. All right, so from there, since we're specifically talking about this leftover funding, any potential pitfalls you guys have ever seen around this? Is there, I don't know, this was a question that came up, but like compliance issues, procurement red flags, are there any things that kind of you would look out for or be nervous about if someone started to pursue leftover funds? I guess, Spencer, that would be for you. This might just be a no.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing to keep in mind is timing, right? So the earlier in the game, the better you are, depending on what kind of advantages you have. And I keep referencing back to having some sort of pathway to an easy acquisition, whether, as I mentioned, a sub, whether you're on a MAC, a multiple award contract, whether you have your own contract. So timing is one thing to keep in mind. Are there any like downfalls, or like if I were to take on unfunded requests, would that be a bad thing? I mean, the only negative part of that, I guess, is you are taking unfunded, so it's not you're not a program of record at this point. You're not going to get annual funding. I mean, you could certainly posture for that. Mike can speak maybe to some cases where he gave somebody unfunded funding, and then in the next couple fiscal years, they found more money or they became a program of record. But there really aren't any pitfalls to even asking the question.
Yeah, I think that hits too to this question about do you look desperate if you're looking for sweep up some? Mike, back over to you.
No, I mean, let me just hit on what Spencer said, right? It is 1 year money, right? The way you think of it, not 1 year, excuse me, 1 year money, right? So if you get sweep up funding, you got to remember that there's no guarantee for a tail, right? Funding tail to come along with that. So that is a risk. And you need to be prepared to talk about how you'll mitigate that risk that is something that we definitely did look at, because the last thing I want to do is get you started and have you hire 15 people and then the next year you got to lay them off, right? That doesn't look good on anybody. So that's not what we want as PEOs, but I think that we can talk about strategies to mitigate that. But yeah, other than that, really, there's really no pitfalls from a PEO perspective. I guess what I would say to you is, if you do get sweep up funding, you better be ready to start the roadshow of what's next, right? Don't wait till the end of the funding and go, well, I was just hoping for another set of sweep up funding, right? You got to really start that battle rhythm of, showing them that you're making progress, you're executing, and then, what it's going to take to go on. That is important. And then also the other pitfall is, they're going to be looking for you to get after it quickly, right? It's not going to be, hey, give me 6 months to figure it out, and then we'll show you how we're going to spend the funding. You got to be, again, ready, locked and loaded and ready to go from that perspective as well. And the more you get, the more pressure there is, right? So be careful what you ask for, right? Don't go from zero to, $100 million. Not that that would ever happen, but overnight, because the expectations that come along with that are huge from a government perspective. And so that puts a lot of burden on you as a company. So just be careful that you don't ask for too much too quickly from that perspective either. Hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, and just to follow on real quick on that, something I think would be helpful for this group is there's a lot of benefits to receiving fallout funding, especially if you're living in the cyber world, right? You're still ramping up, you're still doing some research and development. You can use that fallout funding as matching purposes for your next TAC-5 Strat-5, or if you're in the Army, your Catalyst or your Navy Catapult contract, right? So this could be used as matching dollars for then to get more cyber dollars on the back end, really bridging that valley of death before you get to a program of record or a standard phase 3 contract.
Awesome.
Great point.
Yeah, a lot of strategy involved. Mike, did you have another comment?
No, I was just telling Spencer that's an amazing point. I hadn't remembered that piece of it, so that's great.
Yeah, so lots of strategy involved, and I'm thinking we're sitting here, it's April 24th. So for some folks, it sounds like if you have a contract vehicle in place, you have some relationships with PEOs, or it's a good time to start making some of those. Thinking maybe if you don't have a contract vehicle in place, what are some of, maybe Spencer, this is for you, thinking for next year even, what are some things that I could be doing right now in both scenarios, let's say?
Yeah, if you don't, I think you're still not out of time from this fiscal year. I think we didn't talk about some of the things that are a little sensitive to the government per se, where you really develop a lot of the requirements package. Requirements package being things like the statement of work, and there's going to be a justification and approval letter, right? Those are all inherently government owned. Now, sometimes you get a contracting officer or a program manager that'll push back, hey, that's way out of your lane, don't go down that road. But sometimes they're a little more open to those things, especially in a sole source environment, right? So helping facilitate some of those requirement packages, which would shorten the acquisition window, which would then give you access to potentially a contract before the end of the fiscal year. Now, that's dependent upon the contracting officer, but those are some of the things you can start facilitating. You know the scope of work, right? So maybe what you want to do is, hey, what sort of statement of works? Do you have like a template, or is there something I can reference? And then what you go in and you can basically map it out based on what you're doing or what you want to provide for the government. Again, that can be met with a lot of resistance depending on who you're talking to, but trying to take a lot of that burden off the government as much as possible. So when it gets into the contracting officer's hand and they're writing the contract, now we've shrunken that a window dramatically. Now, if we miss, say, this fiscal year's window, you're looking at next year, again, just get out ahead of it. So these are conversations you can have well into the start of the fiscal year, right? If you're looking operationally, they don't get a lot of money like the program offices do, right? So their budgets are very tight. They start looking at these at the end of the calendar year, right? These are getting viewed by leadership. They're racked and stacked continuously. They're looking at packages. If we were to get money, what will we be funding? So you're going to want them to get these packages, and the packages meaning like, hey, this is what we're going to do. This is how it's going to benefit. You can have it in in a very formal setting, or it can be an email, however you choose. But getting it in the hands of your TPOC, your point of contact, so they can then provide that to leadership and get that rack and stack process right around the end of the calendar year. And then as things move forward, they can kind of pull the ones they want and get those funded. So again, time is valuable. Get started as early as possible.
Yeah.
Sorry, Mike, any other comments to that? Yeah.
Yeah, to that point, right? So there's a couple of things, right? The SBA has templates that you can that they have on their websites. They also on the space and air side, right? AFWorks and SpaceWorks. If you go to their websites, they have templates as well for all of those things. They also have a very detailed schedule that shows you for your different phases of SBIRs as well as StratFi and TACFi, like how that process works and when you can inject yourself into that in general. But anyway, for the templates, that's where I would say you go. But the other thing I wanted to mention, and this is probably a good time, I don't want to take up too much time because I know you got a lot of questions, but is the normal budgeting process is going on right now as well, right? For the 2-year, fiscal year cycle, right? So you have to kind of keep that in mind as well. And you have to be very clear when you're talking to PO representatives of which ones you're talking about, whether it be the sweep up, kind of aspect left over or that budgeting process, right? So don't forget, it's also a good time to go in and talk in general with them about the capabilities you bring, because that could, lead them to say, oh man, I'm putting my budget together right now. Why not put that in there as I put my request in for the next fiscal year? So just don't forget that aspect as well as you move forward.
Amazing. Thank you. We've been hitting most of the questions as we've gone through, but we're officially now in the time that we've set aside for questions and answers. So if anyone has any remaining questions, feel free. I will turn over as much time as possible to any additional questions that come in. I think the last kind of batch of questions we have still open right now. Spencer, they touch a little bit about on your comment at the very beginning around how, as an organization, you focus on non-competitive funding and to what extent that getting to a phase 3 is part of that. And then we have a second additional question around SBIR and whether you can use, as a subsidiary, you can use a parent company's SBIR to get some of this funding. Like, could you use that as a contract vehicle?
Sorry, rookie mistake. To the first question, phase 3 is the goal, right? And that's kind of how when we do strategies on behalf of our clients, it's usually with the entry of a SBIR win. Now, for the audience here, any SBIR win, whether it's a phase 1 or phase 2, grants you, I don't think they like to use the word sole source authority, but it's either follow-on or sole source authority. We simply say sole source authority, meaning it's non-competitive, right? So the second part, how realistic in general is it try to pursue a phase 3 for related work? So as long as it's derived from what you did or loosely related to what you did in a phase 1 or phase 2 environment, especially some of those phase 1s where it's very, you're just starting the research, you can get, I don't want to say it like this, but you can get away with a lot. These are going to be reviewed by the contracting officer and potentially legal, but they're not tech experts. So if you can tie it back to work that you did in any aspect in a phase 1 or phase 2, that fits the bill. Now you have sole source authority, excuse me, and allows you to have access to that phase 3. Phase 3 is the goal. As I mentioned, one of the things you want to do with that phase 3 is you want to be very creative in how it's done, right? So one of the things we try to do is leave a lot of wiggle room, which the government's going to push back on, meaning you want option years, you want not to exceed CLINs, you want IDIQs, which is a different type of contract vehicle itself, but you want ability to plus up that contract. And so I would advocate, rather than just a standard purchase order with 1 or 2 CLINs set for a specific time period, try to get some more where, hey, we're not asking you government to commit to the option year funding, but put that in there just in case, you guys have the money and it's available, right? So from our point as industry, we're pushing back on the government as much as possible to really widen the guardrails on those vehicles, which is funny to say from somebody that's used to sit on the other side and try to limit it as much as possible. But I think, and to Andrew's question, yes, you can you can use the SBIR sole source authority as from a parent contract as a subsidiary. think you just got to tie the two between. So it's dependent upon the contracting officer, but yes.
All right, I haven't seen any more questions come in, so I'm gonna wrap us up here quickly. I have one more question for both of you, but I do want
Can
to.
I just,
Oh,
Roxanne, just,
yes.
can I say
Yeah.
something here? So another mechanism that I wanted you to have in the back of your mind, and Spencer mentioned it earlier, but I just want to kind of leave you with this one is a lot of the PEOs have IDIQs. They're very large kind of Mac IDIQs, right? That they don't tell a lot of people about. This is kind of a PEO secret, so please don't tell them I told you, but they have a large IDIQ, but they're called no cost IDIQs, right? So what they do there is they onboard companies like yours into these no cost IDIQs, meaning they're not going to pay you, right, to come on board in that IDIQ. But they bring you on so that then you have access to all of their requirements as they let them loose. And it's an easy button for them for things like this, sweep up money and stuff. They can throw it on that IDIQ with a very small statement of work. And then you kind of bid on each one of those little tasks. So when you go in to talk to a PO representative, ask them if they have a no cost IDIQ as a backup for, having your own direct contract and an easy button to get to you.
Amazing. Love those tips. Spencer?
Yeah, I mean, he said it, onboarding, they'll onboard you onto a MAC, a multiple award contract, so you'll be amongst other folks. But if you are the only one amongst those other industry partners and you're talking directly to a TPOC or somebody within the program office about a specific requirement, like they're not going to be a ton of other bidders within that pool, right? So you can ghostwrite, another bad word for the government, but ghostwrite that requirement so it's specific to you, and ultimately you're the front runner to win that award within that multiple award contract IDIQ. So I love that idea. That's great for sure.
Is there any way to know that these are available, happening out there, other than talking to people?
Yeah, so some of them are more advertised than not. Obviously, Mike says that some of them are a little held closely to the chest. It makes sense because if you look at some of the big ones out there, the EWAC, which is the Eglin Wide something or another, but it's the Armaments Director within the Air Force, has a ton of people. The ADMS in the past, I don't know what that's currently sitting at, but those are more advertised. They were trying to get a bunch of people on, and then as requirements were coming up, they could broadcast those to those pool of candidates and ultimately get awarded. But I think to Mike's point, just simply ask that question, right? When you do a pitch, obviously you're going to want to address how your requirement is going to fill or make their lives easier. But on the back end, you want to leave them with a ton of different acquisition pathways should they be interested, right? They're going to probably tell you initially no money. So then you're going to want to go down all these, the UFR, and then part of the UFR, do you have this a MAC IDIQ I can get involved with, or who's the large prime you work with? So finding different ways to make it easy for them, because ultimately that's how you're going to get access to funding.
Amazing. My final question, well, first let me say thank you before I turn it over to Kelly. My final question is around what are you reading right now to stay up to date? What do you like to read? Is there a blog you like to follow, a podcast you like to listen to, or even a favorite favorite event or conference or anything like that? I guess it doesn't have to be reading, but if it's something you can read, great. Everyone can Google it right now, but I didn't prep you guys on this one, so this is just off the cuff. Spencer, over to you.
Yeah, so I will say just from an event perspective, this is kind of trial by error. I think like with the LCID and the WDI, the Right Dialogue with Industry, which was hugely attended by AFRL and AFL-CMC, which are the huge buyers for the Air Force and Space Force. What I like about events like that, and even Soft Week coming up in a couple weeks, is the access. So look for events that have access. Specifically with the WDI, the LCID, unfortunately they canceled this year, usually in August timeframe, but they would allow signups. And so we would meet on behalf of our clients, or just in general, meet with these folks, and they would kind of go over like, this is what we're looking for, this is the direction we need to go. Especially it'll give you focus areas, whether it's counter UAS or whatever it may be, right? So the access that these events have. So when you're looking at events, look for access, specifically one-on-one signups, or if there's a PEO deep dive. Those are always highly informal. And on those deep dives too, they usually give away contacts. different positions, who's heading up what task. And so look for events that share that sort of information.
Okay, over to me, I assume. So first of all, what I listen to is Family Guy, right? That's my news. So that's the most I get is, you know, what are they hitting on? So those are the most important topics to me. But as far as access is concerned, right, I think of two things, right? For the Space Force, it's the Space Power Conference, right? That's when every real leader tells you where they're headed for the year, just because of the timing, right? It's in December, which, as I kind of mentioned in the beginning, there's a budget cycle that happens. So in December, the services send their budget over to OMB. It has to be there in late December, right, to OMB. So in December, they can talk about what they sent over, basically, right? They can talk about in the context of, here's what we're looking at in the future, here's where we're headed. Now, they won't talk about the president's budget because it doesn't exist yet, but they will say, here's where we're headed as a service, and it'll give you a little bit of foresight into what they're thinking, right? If they're making shifts and things like that. So that's very important one. Also, pay close attention to like sam.gov and things like that, because they'll announce industry days that are open to small businesses and everybody. And a lot of those are really good. Like SSC has an industry day. So does just about every other, you know, major combatant or major command. They'll have large command industry days where they talk, and all their PEOs will come and talk about what they're doing, where they're headed. That's a great access point as well. So you know, be selective, because you can become like a conference goer, and you don't want to be like the conference goer. You want to pick selectively. But those are two really important access points that I would recommend that you focus on if you're you know, kind of just wanting to know which ones are most important right now.
Amazing. Thank you both so much. Kelly, I'll turn it over to you. I know we're at the final minutes. We have one last wonderful question that came in just about the current climate and if we think that will impact any funding this year. That's something that I'll let you all, you know. Oh, Spencer wants to make.
I'm happy you asked, because I meant to mention this. So let me look at the question specifically.
Just given the current political climate. Yeah.
So it's something we've talked a lot about internal, because as many of you know, we're under a CR, right? So CR meaning baseline funding from the previous fiscal year, meaning a lot of that money is probably already spoken for. So unfortunately, what that would mean, now it's going to be dependent upon program office or at an operational level, how they executed and their money, but you could maybe not see as many opportunities for fallout funding or sweep up funds or whatever you want to call it, because they are at the same levels from previously. Now, looking forward, obviously, we've seen they plan to have a $1 trillion defense budget, so that should bring on ample opportunities in future years for fallout funding. But I think currently in this fiscal year, those funds might be a little tighter than in years past.
Thank you.
Yeah, so let me just say this, right? So Spencer's right on, right? This year is a very odd year, anomaly, right? So don't think of that as but he's not saying there's zero opportunity. Here's why, right? Because CR limits the budget to what you had before. It eliminates new starts. When you eliminate new starts, some of the budget was tied to new start activities, and they have to do something with that funding, right? Especially RDT&E money that would be new, right? So that money has to go to somewhere, and a lot of times they reallocate it internal to services so you don't get swept up, but there could be some fallout from that. So don't give up on it quite yet. But next year, like he said, is going to be a big year for that, because if they do up the budget to $1 trillion, they're going to struggle to get that much money on contract. So there probably will be more sweep up next year.
Thank you, Mike. All right, Kelly, back to you.
Okay, that was amazing, you guys. Totally awesome. Like, just like really, really good. So I appreciate y'all three. I mean, Roxanne, you nailed it too. You're just amazing. So anyway, our next one, it's gonna be hard to top, I would say, this one, but our next one is gonna be another one of our quarterly venture capital webinars that we have. So you'll want to tune into that. Make sure you're on our mailing list. I'm sure if you're here, you're probably already on there, but if you're not, go find our mailing list on our website. We have a YouTube channel. This recording will be there. If you want to go check it out again, re-listen, it'll be there for you. We'll send it out in the link in our auto email that goes out to everybody who attended. We also, go to YouTube, sign up, like, subscribe, do all those things. It helps us out. If you could also pay attention to Albuquerque Space Week, it's coming up. It'll be June 9th through 13th. Atomic 66 is putting together a bunch of activities here in Albuquerque. I am hosting the University Consortium Symposium that week as well. And that is a closed event, but we do have an open networking event on the 10th. So you might want to check it out and go to Atomic 66, look at their website, see what they've got going on, and keep an eye out for our emails also. Open those up, because if you don't open up our emails, you'll get kicked and it'll start going to spam, and then I'll actually just stop sending to you altogether. So make sure you're opening them, even if you don't plan to attend. And check out, or watch for that invite to that networking event. So with that, I'm going to say goodbye. We are right at 11 o'clock, so we did our job well. Thanks everybody, and have a great afternoon.
Thanks, everybody.